Hello, everyone, and thanks for being here. My name is Jordi Yanoshik, and I am the Learning Specialist for Students with Disabilities at the Weingarten Center at the University of Pennsylvania. Today, we're going to talk about procrastination, but probably not in the way you've heard before. Most people think procrastination is simply poor time management or laziness. However, research tells us something very different. For many students, especially those balancing demanding coursework, extracurriculars, research, and internships, procrastination isn't actually about managing time. It is about managing emotions. Today, I'm going to share several practical strategies that you can begin to use immediately. The goal isn't to eliminate procrastination forever. I don't know if that's possible. However, the goal is to make it easier to get started on task, continue, and ultimately finish your important work. So let's get into it. So before we get started, I want you to think about one thing you've been putting off lately. Maybe it's starting a paper, responding to emails, studying for an exam, applying to internships, scheduling an appointment, anything that's going on in your life. Now I want you to ask yourself, why haven't I started? And usually the answer isn't because I don't care. It's much more likely something like, it feels overwhelming. I don't know where to begin. I'm worried I won't do it well. Or honestly, I just don't feel like doing it. So these answers tell us that procrastination is often emotional rather than motivational. So as we jump into this, I would like to talk about one of my favorite concepts, which is called procrastivity. Procrastivity is when we do things that feel productive, but aren't actually moving us towards our goal. So here's what examples this could look like. Organizing your desktop, color coding notes, answering easy emails, cleaning your room, spending an hour making the perfect study guide, but not actually doing any studying. So all of these tasks feel good because they provide immediate accomplishment. And our brains love crossing things off of our to-do list. The problem is that we're avoiding the task that actually matters. So what we want to think about is that being busy is not the same as making progress. So when you notice yourself doing productive looking task, pause and ask, is this helping me avoid something more important, or is it actually a productive task? Think about it. So how we get to why do we procrastinate? There's three common reasons that we kind of keep coming back to. First is task initiation. Getting started often feels harder than continuing. The brain tends to overestimate the effort required before we begin. Second, time perception. Students with ADHD can underestimate how long assignments take or estimate how much time they'll have later. That's why I'll do it tomorrow becomes, how is it due tonight? And third, emotional regulation. And this is probably the biggest one. If a task makes us anxious or uncertain or afraid of failure, our brains naturally look for something that feels better. So this avoidance provides a temporary relief. But unfortunately, this relief reinforces procrastination. So the important message here is you don't need more motivation. You often need a strategy that lowers the emotional barrier to getting started. So let's talk about it. So let's think about how are we going to get our brains to work with us here? One strategy is to borrow from procrastivity. So let's think about why are procrastivity tasks easy? They're simple, they're clearly defined, they're low pressure, they're easy to start. So let's make our important task look a little bit more like that. So instead of saying, I'm going to write my research paper, We start breaking it down into smaller tasks. Think about these like a warm up. You're opening up your laptop, you're rereading a paragraph. Then we start setting some lower bar goals for us. You'll say, I'm going to work for 10 minutes instead of committing to working for 3 hours. Most of the time, when we have these smaller steps and smaller amounts of time that we commit to, continuing becomes much easier. These quick wins help build motivation, which then helps build momentum and then makes it easier to continue with the task. Another strategy that I really like is bounding the task. Our brains dislike vague commitments. Things like, I'm going to study biology, is much harder than saying, I'm going to review biology chapters 4 and 5 for 25 minutes. So notice the difference there. The second had a clear finish line, 25 minutes. Another tool that we can use is the implementation intention, also known as an if-then plan. What this can look like is, if I reach for my phone while studying, then I'll put it face down and work for an additional 5 minutes. Or if I finish class at noon, then I'll go directly to the library before checking social media. By deciding ahead of time how you'll respond, you reduce the number of decisions your brain has to make in the moment. Another thing to think about is how much our thoughts strongly influence procrastination. It's not uncommon for students to have automatic thoughts like, I have to be in the right mood. If I can't do it perfectly, I shouldn't start. Or I don't know enough yet. The challenge is that those thoughts aren't facts. So instead of arguing with them, we can work on reframing them. An example of this would be, I need to be motivated becomes, I only need to start. Or this has to be perfect becomes, this is just a first draft. One technique from acceptance and commitment therapy is called cognitive diffusion. What this looks like is, instead of saying, I can't do this, say, I notice I'm having the thought that I can't do this. This small change creates a distance between you and the thought. So you don't always have to believe everything and every thought that your brain produces. Sometimes we just need to sit with them for a second, reframe them, and move on from there. Now, when we think about managing emotions, the most common thing I'll hear is that students will tell me they have to wait until they feel motivated. However, motivation is unreliable. It's normal to expect some discomfort. It's completely normal to feel bored, frustrated, anxious, or uncertain when starting difficult work. Rather than trying to eliminate those feelings, acknowledge them. You might say, I know I'm feeling anxious about beginning. Simply labeling emotions reduces their intensity. Remember, discomfort isn't a signal to stop. A lot of times that can mean that some learning is taking place. There's some friction there, there's some challenge. But we have to think about it as discomfort is signaling that you're doing something meaningful. So even if it feels uncomfortable in the moment, even if you feel frustrated, know that from those feelings, we can build and we can accomplish tasks. So now, what about when you slip up? Everyone procrastinates sometimes. And the goal here is not perfection, it's recovery. So we want to think about things like, instead of saying, I already wasted today, we want to say, what is the smallest action that I can take right now? The other thing that we can think about is creating simple restart cues. These can look like setting an alarm, standing up and stretching, moving to a different location, or using a phrase like, okay, back to it. These are all ways to signal to ourselves, hey, I acknowledge that I was procrastinating or that I got off track. That's okay. I am going to get back to it, and this is how I am telling myself that I'm going to get back to it. It's thinking about success. It's not always staying on the one track. Success comes from how quickly you are able to recover and get back to what you want to be doing. So, another thing that I always like to talk about, because it's one of the strongest predictors of follow through, is implementing some accountability. This can look like telling someone what your plan is, studying with a friend, scheduling a check in with a TA or a professor. Sometimes simply knowing someone will ask about your project makes it easier to begin. Equally important to this is self compassion. Many high achieving students believe being hard on themselves creates motivation, but research consistently shows the opposite. Students who practice self compassion recover from setbacks more quickly and persist longer. A way of thinking about this is treat yourself how you would treat a friend or someone that you're responsible for helping. How would you talk to them? How would you encourage them? Use that same language with yourself. Treat yourself the way that you would treat a close friend. So, let's start putting everything together into a simple process for when you feel like you're avoiding something. First, identify what the task is. What exactly needs to happen? 2, borrow from procrastination. How can we make it easier to start? How can we break it down? 3, bound the task. Define a small boundary. When will you finish this? How much time are you going to spend? Things like that make it easier to kind of manage the task. Reframing your thoughts. Challenge those unhelpful thoughts. Think about how you're talking to yourself. Acknowledge your emotions. We want to manage them. That is a huge part of procrastination. As we keep coming back to, it's more of an emotional thing than a time management thing. And then finally, recovering from slips. Remember, it's normal to get off track sometimes. Everyone slips up. We are looking for progress, not perfection. Again, you don't have to do all of these every time or all the time or use them for every task, but try to pick one of these that you like and try it out this week. So, a couple of key takeaways that I want to leave you with. First, procrastination is not productivity. Being busy isn't always the same as moving forward. Second, progress comes from small actions, not giant bursts of motivation. Finally, self-compassion is not lowering your standards. It's giving yourself the support you need to meet your standards. So again, identify a strategy that you want to try this week and see how it goes. Remember, small changes practiced consistently often produce biggest improvements over time. And as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one final thought. The strategies that we've discussed are most effective when you have support. College can be demanding, and even the most successful students encounter periods where staying organized, managing their time, or getting started feels difficult. Asking for support isn't a sign that you're falling behind. It's a strategy that successful students use to stay on track. The Weingarten Center is here to help with exactly these kind of challenges. Whether you're struggling with procrastination, managing competing deadlines, improving your study strategies, prepping for exams, or if you're simply trying to build more effective academic habits, learning specialists such as myself can work with you one-on-one to develop strategies that fit your learning style and goals. So if anything that we discussed today resonated with you, I encourage you to schedule an appointment with the Weingarten Center. We'd love the opportunity to work with you and help you turn these strategies into habits to make your academic life a little less stressful and a lot more manageable. Thank you all for joining me here today, and I hope to see you soon at the Weingarten Center. Take care. Bye-bye.